All right, there we go. Okay, good. So without further ado, again, the difference between the cost and price analysis effectively is a price analysis basically looks at the total price paid, right? Cost analysis goes into the specific unique elements such as direct labor, fringe, overhead, G&A, and then profit, right? So again, the cost analysis piece is really only reserved for government evaluators. I've never seen a contractor do that. If I were a subcontractor and my contractor was trying to do that, I would say, heck no, that's proprietary information, right? And again, those are so competitively sensitive data that, companies should do their very best to, not disclose any of those things. Again, the fringe overhead and G&A rate include the fee, is what a lot of people call a wrap rate or a labor multiplier. And again, I've seen companies that get like a 1.3, and I've seen companies that get like a 3.0 in terms of what that wrap rate is. Again, so that is the major components of a cost analysis. Again, the whole point of this is to, demonstrate realism, price realism, like what a fair and reasonable person would pay, right? So the other part of the cost analysis that they talk about specifically is the actual the profit analysis. So there's a couple different factors that are important to know about that. The FAR's got guidelines in FAR 16. I can't remember the specific site, but it's got guidelines per the different contract types. So your fixed price limits are a little bit higher, right? Because the risk is on the contractor to perform. So risk, more fee. It's a little bit lower on the cost side. And some of the things that are important when you are building a cost plus type contract is to explain all of those things very clearly and very succinctly in order to make it very clear to the evaluator so they can go, yeah, okay, we're going to check off the box because they did demonstrate fair and reasonableness with the data that they provided. And again, when you have to validate and justify the proposed profit, they want you to, basically use some of the words back at them, like, talk about your investment and the risk and the complexity of the work. So those things are very important for contractors to understand when they are building up a proposal that requires a narrative and how they get from, the direct labor all the way over to, a fully burdened rate. And so again, here's some more kind of helpful resources that I literally just found out about from, again, Googling cost analysis. And I went down a lot of rabbit holes because this stuff is very fascinating to me. I learned about some new tools and tricks as well that I wasn't even aware of. And I like to think I'm, pretty well versed in all things price analysis. So again, cost analysis. I don't want to get into too much of a deep dive there because I have not effectively had that experience, but I have had, my experience has been with government contractors and being able to, demonstrate the fair and reasonability of the rate and the prices that we are paying. So again, I don't want to get into any one of these specifically because again, it's a lot. It's very terse. It's very, it'd be a good thing to read before you're about to go to sleep, or if you're having trouble sleeping. I will say that. So here's kind of the gist of it, right? So this 15305, again, we all know that one of the major tenets of government contracting is the rule of two or more, right? They promote competition to the maximum extent practical. So the reason why they do that is, the same reason why if you're making a big home remodel, right, or you're making a big purchase, you want to get multiple quotes. You want to make sure you know clearly what you were looking for and what you want, and you want to get an idea of multiple vendors who can provide the same or similar type of work, right? So that's basically the same philosophy that the government uses, right? If I have at least two or more responsible bidders, then I've adequately made the determination that I've had a competition. So A lot of people think that a price competition is solely done on price, right? If I can pay $100, on one hand, or I can pay $90 on the other, I'm always going to pay the 90, right? Well, not necessarily, right? It depends on really the evaluation type, and a lot of times past performance and technical evaluations come in. So if I'm getting, multiple quotes and one bidder goes 90 and has no references, and the one that's 100 gives me a bunch of references, I may have half a mind to be like, hey, I called one of the references, everything checked out. I might pay a higher price because I'm not, the work is so important for me to get done. It needs to get done right. So I may not take a chance with a bidder that doesn't pass all their responsibility checks. And some those can be varied depending on the type of bid that's being asked. So from the real small business standpoint, right, they're talking only like fixed price contracts. So they're not, providing any information about, DCAA forward pricing rates, as an example, right? They're just kind of effectively, gauging what the market is and providing their bid based off of that assessment. Now the government will, again, every solicitation is different, but generally speaking, they'll make sure that the entities registered in SAM.gov, they're not currently debarred. And then, in the reps and certs, they'll ask them if they've, ever been to jail or ever had any tax fraud or anything like that. We're all well versed in that, I believe. And again, it's basically, it's got to be a quote unquote responsible bidder. However, that's defined by the solicitation. Again, the FAR has some, standard rules for that, but again, it can kind of morph and depending on the agency preferences, and some of the buyers can be a little bit different from one to the other. Someone had mentioned about the certificate or current cost of pricing data. That is an issue that I will admit I don't fully grasp the aspect of. I do know that there's a lot of expensive attorneys that can, find out exemptions from this, but my general understanding is that it's only applicable to contracts where there isn't a lot of competition, or they're requiring it due to thresholds. I think something about 2.5 million, I want to say. And again, it's basically putting someone like a CFO, a financial officer, to certify that the prices that are being proposed are accurate, complete, and current as of whatever date. And basically, so you, to the best of your ability and the knowledge that I have right now, this proposal that I'm submitting is, the best thing I can do, right? I'm not making up numbers. I'm not fluffing stuff up. And I do know that there's a lot of reluctancy on many CFOs that I've worked with in the past to sign one of those things. And again, I will admit my knowledge shortcomings in that arena. So the CCOPD, when it's required, definitely make sure you are getting with your financial leadership and understand the ramifications of that. And if you are providing a bid where that is required, then it would behoove you to pay attention to what is being done on the pricing side. Now, in my experience as a contract administrator, and all the levels within that, every job was a different opportunity, right? Because one of the things I really enjoyed about contract administration, especially earlier in my career, and specifically before I had kids, I loved the opportunity to wear many different hats, right? So I felt that contracts afforded me those opportunities. And if I look back at my career, I progressively went from large companies to smaller and smaller and smaller. And the reason why I think I did that is because I wanted to get more and more experience into, the kind of the other duties as assigned as a contract professional, right? And so I think it was about 2009 when I had my first experience into pricing. Okay. And I remember the boss I worked for at the time had said I could do this stuff in my sleep, which I was very flattered But what that was, let me get into, stay with this. So, how many times have you guys been in a proposal and, your program manager or your caption manager, your recruiting people will tell you, hey, this program manager needs to make 150, this, deputy needs to make 100, the sysadmin needs to make 85, and so on and so forth. Well, when I was junior in my career, that's exactly what I did. I used that and I said, that's the basis. It was, expert judgment from the folks providing that information to me. I didn't know better, frankly. And it seemed to make sense at the time. As I've evolved and worked on many more proposals with a lot different levels of scrutiny from contracting officers, I realized that I needed to do a better job of determining the fair and reasonableness of the wages that I was proposing. And we'll get into a little bit more of that later. All right. So got the rule of two or more. The tenet is to purchase from responsible sources and to document that it is fair and reasonable. In order to do that, there's an order of precedence, not an order of precedence, an order of preference here. So far, actually, this is, that's 15404. I forgot the major part here. So I'll make sure I update that. If anybody wants the slides, please email me. But again, so the first and foremost is the competition, right? All things being equal, if there's a competition, it's going to go to the lowest price. However, as we all know from the best value trade-off, that sometimes lowest price doesn't always win, but it is the easiest thing to gauge, right? Again, I'm buying the same widget. I'm going to always buy the one that's lowest price. So that's the easiest way to do a price analysis. However, most contractors that I have done with, I hardly ever see this as a real basis of doing the competition because, again, my experience is they don't really have the subs compete very well. Again, that's just my observation. I'm sure folks have had, different experiences. Love to talk about it, whenever. And so the next best thing in this order of the most preferred technique, if you don't have competition, then okay, how are you going to validate a price? Well, so when I was doing CPSR consulting, we would go, okay, I see that you're charging me $150 in here. How did you come up with that price? And like, well, this is the price that we always charge. So I would ask them to document a historical price paid. They said, oh, they were charging, a lot of companies will redact who that client is, but they would say, okay, here's this bill that I had that demonstrates that I have been paid this rate before. And so that's a very good basis of, making that determination that it's a fair and reasonable price. Parametric price analysis is generally used on commodities, like think gasoline and something like gold, right? So those are parametric pricing techniques that you would use. I'm using the whatever index for this commodity as my basis, and I paid this amount that's less or higher depending on what the circumstances, what's behind that procurement, right? Another one that is used a lot is this competitively published price list. Now, this one is a little confusing a lot because, again, a competitively published price list, what does that actually mean? Well, in my opinion, if you have a published price list, it's really not competitive. Like if you think of GSA, you think of, all the GSA schedules, we all should understand that those are ceiling rates, right? They don't really represent the prices that are actually paid. So I've seen a lot of companies get dinged on their price analysis because they were using GSA as a basis, and the NCMA folks were like, wait a minute, these are ceiling rates. How did you use this as a basis? So they kind of didn't like the price analysis from that one client, and that's okay. So the one that I've seen the most done is this independent government estimate, IGE. A lot of people call it independent contractor estimate, ICE. And that is where things get a little interesting. I will do a little deeper dive on that a little bit later here. Prices paid through market research. Okay, that's kind of like I do a Google search and I find, stuff from Amazon, I find stuff from Lowe's, and, I use that to make the determination that, the price I paid for this particular vendor is within, what I would find doing an internet search. And then the last one, the last and the least, is the analysis of data other than cost or pricing data. So if you ask me, I don't even know how you would do that. How do you justify a price by using stuff that isn't price related? So to me, I've never really seen that one go. Again, you try to start from the top. I want to compete everything. If I compete it, my price analysis is very easy. I went with this one because they were lower priced, right? Or I went with this one because they had a better technical solution and I'm willing to pay the whatever premium. So on and so forth. Those are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 7 different pricing techniques. Again, competition is the main one that is supposed to be used. And, in from a prime contractor standpoint, bidding to the government, the competition is what the government uses for their price analysis, right? They don't want to do a cost analysis, frankly. So that's why they always want to compete. The cost analysis is painful. I've seen the documentation, and I've worked with some of those folks who like some of the data that I provided to them randomly, on like social media and stuff like that. So let's get into kind of the keys, I think, to effective price analysis. How many of you have ever, done a lot of NDAs, done like 20 NDAs, and then you have like 5 TAs, and then you go ahead and, do a bid with like 3 subs. On the back end of that, when you're telling when you are issuing a subcontract or a purchase order, what have you, to a subcontractor supplier, use that story to say how you whittled down from 20. I had 20 conversations with 20 different businesses, and I went with 5 of them because they were the 5 best that, had the capabilities we were looking for, or they filled a socioeconomic status that we didn't have. I think it's important to tell the story, tell the background of what's going on with the procurement. And I can't tell you how many times I see this, but everybody does a sole or single source determination, because it's really hard to prove that there's a competition. Again, I went with this subcontractor in this labor category because we know people are people. Right? Just because I qualify for a labor category doesn't mean I can't qualify for a different labor category. And so there's a lot of, explaining that you need to do when you go with a specific subcontractor and you can't adequately document that you went with 5 bidders and only one of them showed up, right? I think it's extremely important as a prime contractor, if you're on a limited, on a multiple award IDIQ, as an example, I would always submit a no bid notification to my contracting officers. The reason why I did that is because I thought it would help them do their job in effect. They gave me an opportunity to bid. I'm a responsible bidder by being a contract holder of that IDIQ. And, I would give them an explanation of like, this isn't what we do, or we don't have the resources to do this, or whatever. Give them some sort of valid enough reason to do that, and that helps them, be easy to work with. Again, provide the appropriate context. Like, okay, I went with this bidder because we needed this. Here was the statement of work I provided. This is a response. Explain again from the order of precedence. If you didn't compete it, why it wasn't competed. It was, urgent and compelling, or it was a unique unique technical capability, or it was, directed by the customer. Because a lot of ones I did like maybe 15 years ago, we had a little checkbox. It was customer directed. And we learned that the auditors didn't think that was very acceptable. So it was one of those things where we caught or conditioned our project folks or project managers, operators, to get the why behind that, right? So it was customer directed why. Oh, well, they were on the legacy program, or oh, they're the OEM, right? Or they're the ones that originally did the install. So just try to get that extra layer of when somebody's asking you, we need to go with this subcontractor, get that reason why and use it in your narrative, right? So again, if you're not doing a competition, you're not getting an old invoice from them that validates the prices that they paid. You can't get the parametric estimate. They don't have a competitively published price list. Then what I do is do the independent contractor estimate, and I will get into some of those tricks a little bit later. They're getting close to that now. So find the data that supports the technique that you use. Again, so I use the when I was doing this like 7-8 years ago for CPSR consulting, we used salary.com, and we used a memo by an accounting firm that quantified what a fair and reasonable wrap rate would be as defined by the Census Bureau. So we would take like the 10th percentile and the 90th percentile of the salaries, burden that up with whatever kind of NACE code we were looking at. And then we would say, okay, well, fair and reasonableness range is between $110 an hour and $190 an hour. So we're great paying $170 here, right? Again, I think it's important to validate how you came up with your competitive range, but again, find the data that supports that. Again, use that broad range. And that's, I put this in here because I really like data charts and visuals. But again, having done as many cost plus bids, a lot of times you talk about cost savings, right? So this was an interesting, the IT dashboard. If you're not familiar with it, check it out. And you're in the IT field, highly recommend it, because you can use a lot of this data in your narratives to, bid a little bit less than what they're asking for. Again, I found if you use data and you tell a compelling story with it and it makes sense, you can go ahead and do that, and feel free to. Again, I think the government likes, contractors that, spend some time thinking about these things, right? Like we talk about tricks that I use in my business. We talk about grooming of employees, right? Like you have every couple of years, it makes sense to kind of hire, maybe interns, or maybe, folks just right out of college or whatever, to kind of train them up into these jobs. So, that's what we kind of call greening. You get the old graybeards, I guess, to, train the younger folks who are, theoretically less expensive, I guess. So I just thought this was really helpful, because you can, again, it's important to kind of, honestly cherry pick the data that you were looking for adequate price analysis. Because let's be honest here, by the time the price analysis is actually done by a subcontracts administrator generally, or, a contracts manager, it's an afterthought. The procurement's already done, the decision's already been made, right? So I view this as starting from the actual proposal process, right? And again, documenting those NDAs and those TAs. Okay, I sent X amount out. You can use that story as a historical context within that procurement, right? So again, we want to make sure that anybody looking at our price analysis can understand why we went with this subcontractor and how we validated the prices that they paid. There's a lot of other nuances to this, but this was frankly the best I could do with the time that I had to prepare. Some of the interesting things that I've used in the past is, again, I was mentioning the IRS and census data. There are a lot of insights you can infer from those. As an example, if you know the NACE code of a procurement, you can pull up data. Actually, I might be able to pull one up here for us. Can you guys still see? No, it's on the slides only, isn't it? Oh, looks like Michael, you got a question here. Got your hand raised.
Yeah, I had a couple things just wanted to mention, but it may take a minute or two if you don't mind.
No, not at all.
Sure. When we were talking about the uh, certified cost and pricing data, sometimes the KO may request that, or it may request something other than certified cost and pricing data. And they may come back to us and ask for a pricing cert. They're basically dotting I's and crossing T's, and it may be below that threshold, that 2.5 million. And old enough to remember that it used to be like 700K. And even before that, it was 650. And trust me, if I'm old, some of the KOs are old as well. And they want that comfort level. They want to document their file. So if we need to submit the cert and say that, take it right out of the FAR and say it's, it's costs are current, accurate, and complete as of the date of agreement on price, easy to do. And so it's something that oftentimes I used to see. That, and then when you were talking about price competition, and reasonable competition for price realism, sometimes it may be that we say you get two responsible bidders, and one comes in with a bid of say $100,000 and another comes in at $170,000. In some cases, the KO may say, okay, this really isn't competition because one is extremely high and one is extremely low. Obviously, we can't award to anybody that's not a responsible or responsive contractor, but sometimes they want a little bit more than that. And just mentioning that. And then with our primes and subs, oftentimes as a prime, it's okay to go back to your subcontractor and ask, hey, what's the basis of your price reasonableness? How did you do this? Do you have mapping to labor categories? Put the onus on them because they want the subcontract. And once they give you that data, that's great. It's great for your CPSR and it's great for your files. So,
yeah. Spot on, Michael. I mean, yeah, if you can get them to document that they've already charged this rate to a different contractor or specifically an agency, that's the best thing you can do in that case. I would argue that, again, if you have like one rate of $80 an hour and another one at 150, that they're not talking the same thing. They have a different basis of estimate, right? So one of the things that I do is like to get as much data as possible because, when I was just starting out doing pricing, I mentioned I would just use a figure that, a capture manager or, program manager would tell me and would use that. Then I started realizing, okay, the way that the government does cost realism from the direct labor standpoint is if I don't have John Barker's pay stub, right, or I don't have Michael Freelander's letter of intent at a specific rate, then what do? I make it up. I use a salary survey. I use the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And so that's where the fun of this really gets in. And that's what I really enjoy doing is, again, the government does that cost realism basis on, they do the cost analysis on the wrap rates. For the big companies, it's an easy drill because that's effectively outsourced to DCAA, right? The companies disclose to DCAA. DCAA comes in and audits every so often to make sure that, contractors are, having fair and reasonable costs going into the correct indirect pool, right? Generally speaking, it's fringe overhead and G&A. Fringe is basically the benefits that an employer would need to pay to attract quality candidates. So those costs would be like, your mandatory taxes, right? Then your leave, your insurances, things like that. Then the overhead is kind of the next component of that. And that is, the cost of computers and telephones or, an office space, things like that. So basically I would call it as like tools that you need to do the job, right? That would be kind of an overhead. Some companies have overhead people that work, right? And then G&A is the one that's there's a lot of confusion on G&A. So G&A is general and administrative. That's supposed to be, your contract administrators, your procurement people, your accountants, your lawyers, your sales and marketing, right? Well, those are all things that you need to successfully run a business, but those costs are not accurately, applicably charged to a direct contract. So those are the three major cost inputs on top of the direct labor rate, right? And then the profit is, again, the profit. That's how it generally works for the more sophisticated prime contractors. They know what their indirect rates are. So the only real flexibility that I used to think you had was on the direct labor and the profit. Now, as I've learned and seen a few things or two, I know that the reluctancy from CFOs a lot of times is they know their indirect rate is going to be way higher in the next couple of years, right? These guys are strategic thinkers. They're thinking, at 3 to 5 year terms, I have a 3 to 5 year contract, but I'm using the same indirect rate over. I think that's why there's a reluctance to sign those CCOPDs, right? But again, I don't want to speak too much into that. The only thing I would say is, again, if I don't have a pay stub of a person, I don't have a letter of intent, then I have to go and validate why I chose this labor category, and I need to really justify the salary survey that I used and why. So some of the things I do a lot, especially when I'm pricing services, is I take the labor category quals from solicitation, and then I'll use like my favorite salary survey data, which a lot of times is Economic Research Institute. It's very easy to work with. And then I'll butt up those labor category descriptions next to each other. And then, if it's like 3 years experience or 5 year experience, it's very easy for me to create a model that, pulls all those things in. So I can look at, a lot of the salary survey data. If I map it to this one, my labor rate is 60K. If I do it for, this other salary survey, it's 80K, right? And so what I see a lot of is companies that are bidding on work, but don't actually have actual concrete data. And what I mean by that is, I would say that, hey, this sysadmin in DC needs to make 80K a year. That's what my salary survey said, right? So I'm like, hey, recruiting team, how does that actually jive to candidates that you're speaking to? And more often than not, I get crickets, or what is this opportunity? Again, so you're always trying to find that right balance between, winning contracts at, rates you can execute to having, the ability to be able to successfully run those jobs. Because as we all know, government contractors, need to win contracts and they need to be profitable, but they don't have a lot of people sitting on the bench, right? So it's very important at that high level CFO type stuff to have, to be carefully in managing those indirect rates, right? I mean, I've seen, again, like I was saying earlier, wrap rates from like a 1.3, that's a real super low cost provider, right? You probably wouldn't want to work there. And then I've seen real high end, manufacturers of aircraft and spacecraft, that have wrap rates of like a 3.0. And what that effectively means, if I, negotiate a rate with my employee at $50 an hour and I charge 100, then that's a 2.0 wrap rate, right? So those wrap rates, again, are very competitive sensitive, and they're very much highly proprietary with companies. So no one really talks about them per se, but we all kind of, it's what isn't said, if that makes sense. Looks like we have a question here. Will, thanks for your question. Yeah, I think it really depends on what that invoice says, right? If it is it doesn't really matter who the client is, as long as the rates, at or around what the rate that you need to document, then I think it's fine, right? I think it's, acceptable to have like a, 3 to 5% escalation on last year. To me, that would pass the reasonable test for me. And again, that would eliminate me from having to go and, do my own independent estimate on a specific rate for them, because I've satisfactorily answered the question of which price analysis that I used. I hope that answers the question.
That does. Thank you.
John, that ERI data that you were talking about before, I've been able to use that in the past to justify escalation. And in some cases, the government doesn't like it, but it's reasonable to anticipate escalation on an annual basis. And what's happened recently has put some contractors at risk because you'd think about a 1 or 2% escalation, and now all of a sudden we're looking at a factor that's a multitude of that. So just wanted to point that out.
No, absolutely. I mean, some contractors are really struggling with that because I mean, look at I think it was Boeing. All right, I did a blog post about Boeing one quarter. They lost. No, I think it was Boeing. Boeing lost $3.3 billion in one quarter, right? One quarter. I quantified it. It was like 18 million a day of lost money. And, following the industry, news sources, it was interesting to me because 3-4 years ago, they were winning a lot of firm fixed price contracts. And Lockheed Martin was the company that was losing them. And the CEO of Lockheed had said, if they were to bid at the rates that were awarded to Boeing at the time, they would have lost like $5 billion on these deals. So again, depending on the contract type, right? So lowballing a firm fixed price contract is a great way to put yourself out of business. In fact, that's my biggest fear, is helping a client win a large fixed price contract and I didn't get the labor mapping right. Right. And so I try to do as many, I need some real intel. I'm a data nerd. I like to, pull in as many of those data sources, but also corroborate it with, hey, do we know any of these people actually doing these jobs? What do they make? What do they expect to make? What would it take for them to work for us rather than their current company? Because again, that's what I mean, at the end of the day, business is about people, right? But you gotta, keep them motivated. And, I've seen a lot of companies that kind of, one manager I worked for would refer to it as wage busting, which is a, kind of a terrible place to be, honestly, if you're one of those poor unfortunate souls that, is affected by that. Because what that basically means is, you're going to get your wages slashed anywhere from, 10 to 30% or something. I was recently talking with an old colleague, and they were a subcontractor of the business I used to work for. And they were telling me how they had a list of all these incumbents they were going to hire, right? And the salary differences from what they were told by their prime contractor and what the candidates were actually making was in the tune of $30,000 to $40,000 a year. Now, that's just awful, right? I mean, nobody would do that. But again, it's the stuff that happens, unfortunately, in this business sometimes, right? We have, business owners struggle with, finding that sweet spot between winning more contracts at, fair and reasonable rates. And, again, depending on the nature of the work, there's lots of different aspects to, cost and price analysis in terms of how do I put my best foot forward in order to win this procurement, right? And on the back end of that, again, from the government's perspective, from a contracting officer perspective, they have to validate that the prices that they pay are fair and reasonable. Again, the best way to do that is, hey, I had a competition. I went with 5 bidders. I went with the lowest price one. It was LPTA, right? Again, the important thing to really consider here is what Section M says, right? From the unified contract format, Section L is the instruction. Section M is the evaluation criteria. That's the most important thing in the whole thing, I believe. Again, and if it's best value trade-off, then, what is really important is to know, what is said in the thing, like how are they going to evaluate it? What's the percentage of a technical and a staffing plan, past performance, things that can, make or break whether someone wins a contract. And then also some of the other things that I've learned is the agency willing to pay a premium for highly acceptable work versus acceptable, right? Because a lot of the gripes I hear sometimes, it's, yeah, we know it's best value, but it really comes down to price. And, you know, I totally understand that, right? It's that it's a lot more, shades of gray in that. 'Cause again, price is the easiest thing to quantify. It's, it's literally numbers, right? Now, how do you successfully evaluate a technical approach? I can't speak to that, but what I can speak to is how does, my technical team rate themselves, and how do they expect the competition to rate, right? And then when I start believing that, okay, we are going to get a higher technical score, then I can start thinking about what kind of price premiums do I want to put on my prices. Again, I can afford a little bit more in salaries here, right? Because I'm competing against this company and they're expensive, right? So again, it's pricing really is more of an art than a science, I believe. And again, it's just kind of telling that story, why this company, why us, right? And then, the price analysis piece is basically explaining to, government authorities why you went with a certain sub. Because again, the government wants to ensure that they are being good stewards of our money as taxpayers, right? And they need to kind of flow that down to the big prime contractors to ensure that they are also being good stewards of that money. And the best way to do that is by competition. So again, it's really an art to try to quantify that a competition has been done. And again, I just kind of want to get as much of that context as I can. Tell me the story of how this procurement evolved, and use that into, and then combine that with data that I can manufacture, procure, whatever. Again, I do cherry pick data all the time, in particular when I'm trying to justify a client's price paid to a subcontractor that I had nothing to do with, right? And again, a lot of my recollection of being a contract slash or subcontract administrator, right? When I was dual hatted, that's what we did. I basically got this file. Hey, go ahead and issue them an award based off of here. And I'm like, well, we need to have a quote. Where's the statement of work? So again, it all really starts with that, the pre-award stuff, right? So any person out there struggling with this in their business, it really would behoove you to, have a one-on-one with, the people that are the technical directors, if you will, that are steering the work to certain subcontractors, and get inside their head and understand their rationale. So then you can use that to successfully, document your price analysis. Are there any questions out there? I know I'm a little long-winded. I know we got plenty of time, but I don't need to keep you guys if, but I'm happy to address any specific questions you have, or, talk more in generalities about certain other topics.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
I got so we're a government contractor, and we obviously submit proposals periodically throughout the year. And actually, I'm in charge of the forecasting and budgeting and general finances of the organization. So what we have to do is, it is a tough job when you have to forecast the indirect rates, because
Yes,
pricing, as you mentioned, is definitely an art, because you may have one customer, a state or local government, who you may be able to provide a lower rate to, but then you have other customers where you may want to pad it a bit to make sure that that bottom line is all squared away. But all of it goes into the base of the rates and things of that nature, so you can project your business base for the entire year. And providing pricing, typically we have a base and 4-year options. So that first year that we price is for the most part okay, but who knows what's going to happen in the next 3 to 5 years. The majority of our contracts right now are time and material. So we don't have any cost plus fixed fee contracts at the moment. and we don't have any firm fixed price contracts at the moment. I could definitely understand a company's pain if the majority of their contracts were firm fixed price, because man, inflation and during the
Yeah.
pandemic, the rates and stuff went up. So that was pretty much a hardship for them. So I can definitely understand that. Fortunately, we do have a GSA schedule and all that. So we've built in some annual escalation in our rates, which has helped us somewhat buffer some of the rate increases that we had to endure over the past two years or so. But yeah, those indirect rates and RAP rates, they are the engine of the organization. If a company doesn't know what those are, or you're having a struggle with that, anyone needs to get their hands wrapped around that to make sure that you apply that, in the pricing model.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's again kind of piggybacking on the current certificate of current cost of pricing data. Those forecasts are basically best guesses. They're estimates. We want to do the best job we can, but we
Yep.
assumed we were going to win this contract, and we
Yep.
assume it's basically documenting assumptions and then hoping that they come to fruition.
Yeah, yes.
Right. So again, if you fail to win a contract, then instead of my 1.8 wrap rate, I'm at a 2.0, and crap, I bid at 5% margin, and
Yeah.
now all of a sudden I'm underwater
Yeah.
in years 3 to 5. So again, it's a difficult job for sure. And I feel like my job now is to try to get the highest price I can for my client and win.
Mhm.
But again, like there's a lot of real no to low cost, people bidding zero margins that I need to kind of, black hat for my clients to make them aware that some companies actually do this. And some of them are, out of business, of course, and some of them actually did make it up because their DL basis went up 4x. Right.
Yeah.
And so that drastically drives your G&A in particular.
Yep.
So
Yeah, and that happened to us. We had a 1-year deal, an IT contract, and it was a 1-year deal. And then next thing you know, it was up for rebid. Well, it was firm fixed price. Well, we bid it, basically little to no margin, because we wanted to, secure our first customer at this particular program office. So lo and behold, next recompete, somebody took our price, and it was almost to the penny. They underbid it 10%. And they were somewhat technically sound, but we bid it probably 10% more than what we had initially priced. And we didn't necessarily win the project, but I've heard from the program office they're having some difficulty staffing the job because they underbid this thing and the company's not making any money off of it. So
Yep.
that lowest cost technical.
Yeah, it's like the new old thing that I'm sure Michael and Faith can go. That old pendulum. It's like every decade or 15 years or so, it kind of goes back and forth. Like, oh, we're gonna go best value. Oh no, we're gonna go lowest price. And it's just like, oh, well, we tried that and got effed, and we didn't. Now we want to go best value. And so yeah, I mean, you're what you're telling me is not unique, unfortunately, right? Again, what I see a lot of now is companies that won a single award IDIQ, with multiple task orders, are now going into multiple award IDIQs. And I love multiple award IDIQs personally, because I've helped companies win a lot of work under those vehicles. And so, and I can pretty much, I never say guarantee, but I'm highly confident that, I have a client that's technically proficient in what they do. And there's awards of like, 4 to 5 bidders that I'm very confident that I know how to price those. And I don't price them low at all. I find out what that IGE is, and I basically bid that, or 1 or 2% below that, depending on what the customer is announcing, right? And again, I think that's important for a couple of reasons. One is that you have a high ceiling on your IDIQ. 2 it puts your competitors on notice that, hey, I'm high priced here. I think most importantly is those task orders are free for all, in my opinion, right? So just because I bid something on an IDIQ level, generally speaking, that becomes a ceiling rate. I'm able to discount off of that.
Yes.
And so, if I have two bidders at $100 an hour, but one is providing a 30% discount and the other one's providing a 5% discount, which one looks better? And I think that, so again, having high ceiling rates is good, but understand that they really are ceiling rates. And again, it kind of gives me some, more clarity into the competitive landscape. Okay, I know who I'm competing with now, right? Well, these full and open ones, it could be like, theoretically thousands of bidders. And as someone who, knows the techniques of, competitive intelligence, when I have like 2 or 3 companies that I'm looking at, it's a lot easier to get, very specific and get a very good idea of what I think their wrap rate is, right? If you look at publicly traded companies, if you look at their SEC filings quarterly, you can get a pretty good idea what their G&A rate is. You can get a pretty good idea of, they're basically the wrap rates. The hard part though is determining which freaking business unit it is. Right. Because some of the big boys will have like a low cost business unit and they'll have a high end one. And, so again, it's a cat and mouse game. It's, everybody's getting smarter and smarter. The government doesn't want to get ripped off. There's a lot of contractors and there's going to be a lot more I foresee in the next couple of years because everyone's trying to get into this space, with this upcoming, doom and gloom that the media keeps, shoving at us. So, anyway, I got off on a tangent there. But I do want to show you one thing that I've been working on, if you'll indulge me, is share my screen. Okay. You guys see my screen? No.
Yes.
Okay. So I've been working on mining data from like sam.gov. So I got some sam.gov information just of last year's, I had a customers like, what's the best industry to get into? I said, I don't know. How about the ones that have the most spending? So according to sam.gov in fiscal year 22, which was, October 1 of last year to September 30 of this year, the government spent, 38 billion in, this NAICS code. So one of the other things that I mentioned earlier about the way we've done price analysis in the past that have been subject to NCMA scrutiny is we use this labor multiplier. So what this does right here, it takes industry averages as defined by the census, and the source data is anonymized tax receipts, right? So every company has assigned NAICS code. I don't know how the IRS does it, but every 5 years they publish what the average revenues are and the average payroll. So in my simplistic brain, I'm like, hey, the difference between the average payroll and the average revenues is my wrap rate. And I found out about this 7 years ago because, when I was consulting for CPSR firms, that's exactly what we used. We use these industry standards as, a wrap rate for an engineering one of 2.5 is fair and reasonable. How do I know? Well, it's coming from the IRS. It's coming from the census. And in my conversations with government auditors and contracting officers in particular, they love it when you use government data to validate the prices that you're charging. Again, I'm cherry picking the data. And, here's another one that's, a 1.7. And you look at some of these other ones where the algorithm is not as precise because, commercial building, right? That does, my algorithm here doing this is not complete because I'm not talking about the cost of materials. I'm talking mostly like, human capital, right? But again, it's all about picking the right kind of data that tells the story that you need it to. I'm paying $130 an hour for this. How do I get to that $130 an hour? Well, I'm going to use, a 5.4 index of wrap rates And then I'm going to say, I'm going to have to pay this person $125K a year. 125K divided by, 2080 is $60 an hour roughly. So I can be fair and reasonable at $150 an hour. I would, go further into that. And here's another spreadsheet I want to show you. Where did it go? Just pulled this out yesterday. This is data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, right? Anybody can download it. It's a massive file though. What it does, it provides. So I'm in Wilmington, North Carolina. So I cherry picked, because again, this file is so big, it craps my computer out. But what I want to show you, it breaks down into very specific labor categories, right? I think there's 800 or so specific detailed ones. And the beauty of this data is that it tells me how many employees are in there and what the average rates are. The average hourly rate for this, whatever labor category this is, an administrative service manager, the average salary is 116K. So I would take the low 61K, right? Then I would take the high of 173K, and that's my range for my DL. Again, I can't do a cost analysis on my subcontractors because they would tell me to pounce in, right? It's proprietary information. It's none of my business. I don't need to do that. But I do need to explain how I came up with an estimate that documented that my $150 an hour was fair and reasonable. So I told a story. I cherry picked the data that I needed that made sense, right? This person is a, administrative facilities manager. I have all the labor category descriptions of what the Department of Labor describes as those things. And, as we know, the government is not a very, fast moving machine. So, where the real art of this is again, is in the labor category mapping. So as an example, there's about 800 different job categories, as quantified by the Bureau of Labor Statistics that's run by the DOL. How many job categories are out there in the country, in the world? Multiple thousands, right? So again, how do I know that this financial manager is really a business systems analyst? And again, it's just about the explaining and the rationale that I use, and it has to make sense. Again, a competent businessman, or missing out. Michael, can you help me on the prudent business person? Or there's specific nuanced language that I'm striking out on here, but
Pardon me, John, what's that for?
Where they describe like what a fair and reasonableness determination is, like
yeah, what an average business or would pay for a service. What's a reasonable rate?
Yeah, one of the so I think, since I'm on the screens now, I do want to show you this tool, because this is a very, very excellent tool for people that develop IGEs, right? Independent government estimates. I've used, that's not the one I wanted. Apologies. That's not the one I wanted.
And John, what you're saying about wrap rates, excellent. I mean, I came over from DOD, and we didn't work where I was at. We didn't work on the cost side. We moved over to industry, and first time I was sitting around the table working on a proposal, I heard the expression wrap rate, and honestly didn't even know what it was. But you have to get smart very fast and very quickly.
Exactly. I have a lot of people that, pick apart my posts when I do that every, couple months or something, where I talk about wrap rates, and, I get a little judgy sometimes. So when I see a client that has a really high wrap rate, I'm like, WTF are you spending all this money on? Like, you should be here. You're not winning contracts because you're not competitive, right?
Yeah. When you mentioned that low wrap rate that you mentioned, I'm thinking of a staffing firm.
Exactly. It's very bare bones. They don't even provide benefits.
No, some of the benefits aren't really benefits. And
yeah.
So I have a document I can give you, John, and whoever, but it's a firm that did a study on maybe 200 or 300 contractors, and it was anonymous. I mean, to us, to the reader, it's anonymous. They don't tell who, what rap rate.
Is that the gauge report?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a fascinating one. I've been meaning to, yeah, exactly. Spot on. So again, I use, that census data because it also covers commercial companies.
Yeah.
Right. Again, for purposes of price analysis, I want to make sure I can get real high when I need to.
Right.
From a competitive standpoint, I would never use that.
Right.
I mean, I would go, what is my should costs? What are my wrap rates? What are the assumptions that go into it? How confident are we that these are actually going to be the wrap rates at the end of the day, or the end of the year?
Mhm.
But this tool is very helpful. Can you guys see my screen still? The GSA buy.gov.
Yeah.
Okay. One of the beauties about this is I use this to kind of come up with a top end value. When I do price to win, I do it from two different angles. One is top down, one's bottom up. My top down is what's that IGE and how can I get as much to it as I can and put a credible bid out. So I will use a tool like GSA Calc. So, hey, I got a system administrator, right? It might help if I spell it correctly. System analyst, system administrator. All right. So on average, all the GSA schedules, this is an aggregator. So I got $98 an hour. A lot of people will use this as their price analysis. I would caution to not do that. The reason being is, again, these are not competitively published price lists. It's a price list, but it's not competitive. So I've seen companies get really dinged on that. The beauty about this system, I'm gonna show you a little data nerd trick. I'm gonna do a search for nothing. I'm gonna get, did it refresh? I think it did refresh. And hold on. All right. It's not, my computer's slow because I'm probably running too many things. All right, $116 an average. You got a huge tail, right? Because you got the your KPMGs, PWSCs of the world that charge $500 rates. And watch this. I'm going to export this data. Now, results may vary when you do this at home. Just want to caveat that. But I just downloaded every single piece of data in this system. So I got just 43,000 different price points. I know who the companies are. I know what the quals are. So again, I use that for my top end, right? Again, when I'm doing, a price analysis, I want to get that top end, but I don't want to use this as my source per se. But again, when I'm doing like an IGE for a client where I'm trying to determine what a customer's budget's going to be, I would use something like this as my high water mark. And then on the other side of that, okay, I would look at the salary survey data and go, okay, what do I actually need to hire competent people at these labor categories with these quals? Again, is it 80K? Is it 90K? Okay, that's fine. But how did we get to that 90K? I need to explain that. I have John Barker's pay stub. He pays 90K. Okay, good. I have Michael Freelander's. He's paid 150K. Okay, good. Right? If I don't have that, then I have to go down to the thing that's, a little bit more risky from, again, that cost realism vantage point. Okay, well, I have these contingent offers. I have a contingent offer of, this person at this rate under this solicitation. Okay, great. If I don't have that, then I go and find the data that I need that substantiates the prices that I need. And, when you're putting all these things together, it's important to know what that top line is. Because again, I see so many companies going after work where I'm like, their average rate, fully burdened for their, average person, say makes 85K, is $120 an hour. And they're going after work where if I look at the previous prices paid through looking at FDPS FPDS or USA Spending or STAM.gov. And I'm like, these historically prices paid on average were like 60, 70K, or I'm sorry, $60, $70 an hour. And I'm like, you shouldn't bid. You will not be competitive. Don't waste your time. And again, that's what it's all really about, is figuring out, where to play, to put your best foot forward, and to figure out, is this the right opportunity for me, in my business? And again, how you get there that's really the art of it. But again, it's really on, are you in the right spaces to be competitive? Okay, if you are, then let's look at the competitive landscape. Let's look at the big players. Let's look at the agencies buying that, so on and so forth. I'm getting a little off topic. I'm putting my BD hat 101 here, but anyway, I think you guys get the gist. If there's anything I can clarify for anybody,
John,
happy
I
to. Yeah.
just have a quick question. You mentioned, I'll go on FPDS and government spending, and you may have the history of that particular contract, but how do you determine the rate of a particular opportunity in the past? I mean, I know we'll guess how many FTEs maybe that we think the contract have on the project. We estimate it from that standpoint, but do you have any other method to use to come up with a rate? You mentioned that 120 versus $70 an hour.
Yes. So that's I don't want to say it's secret sauce.
Okay, I got
but no, it's not. I mean, it's not an exact science, right? So there's
Right.
a lot of companies that make significant investments in GovWin, right?
Yes. Yes, we have GovWin.
Oh, you do? Okay. So then what I would do in GovWin is, in USA Spending,
Yep.
if I know the contract number,
Yep.
I
Yep.
can find the solicitation number.
Yep.
So I look for the solicitation, and it looks specifically for that pricing output, and then I reverse engineer it.
Okay. All right.
Right. So I'm like, okay, well, there are 1 million hours in here. This was a $50 million contract. My average rate is $50 an hour, less ODCs.
Yep.
Right. So
Yep.
again, you have to make assumptions, of course, but again, it's how much specificity can I get? I will tell you this. I was working for a client a couple of years ago, and how a lot of contracts will have a plug figure, bid 50K for travel and 100K for materials,
Mhm.
right? Okay, so I was getting in the weeds of this one particular competitive assessment, and I found, and I think it was FTPS or FPDS, I found that they broke it out in each line item. So I was like, wait a minute, I'm a curious guy. I was thinking about this. So like, okay, well, in the solicitation, they said 50K and they charged 57.5.
Mhm.
They did the same thing. And so I did the math and I was like, wouldn't you know it, 8.6 is their G&A rate.
All right. All right.
Again, so it's just kind of, putting together those puzzle pieces. Like, how do you, how can I make assumptions facts, right? And then how do I get clarity on the things that I'm unsure about, or more clarity, right? Because again, there's no guarantees in life. There's only probabilities. I had a client, prospective client I was talking to maybe a month ago, and they wanted me to guarantee him I was going to win contract work. And I was like, I can
That's
guarantee
not a client you want.
I will guarantee I will increase your odds. I can't make that guarantee because again, I don't know what you're going to be doing, if you're going to be listening to the stuff I'm telling you, but again, it's this is a fascinating industry we're in, and I'm just so grateful to be speaking to you all, this evening, and thank you for your time and attention.
John, thank you very much for presenting the topic and representing the chapter so well. We appreciate it. And years ago, I talked on the same pricing subject, and it's very interesting to me. I haven't done it for many, many years, and seeing some of the new techniques, because just when you think you've seen it all, you see more. And I love the fact that you go back to the RFP, and if you can ever find an RFP where they break the cleanse out by labor category, you're right there. You've got exactly what you need to know. And but it's that hunt for that information. And so yeah, great topics. And
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah. Again, it is just kind of, picking out those, golden needles in the haystacks, looking at a lot of the things and going, okay, what's my target? How did they get there? Like a lot of people don't do that. The reverse engineering. Like I was talking to a very sophisticated client and they were having some trouble with some task order bids. And they're like, and these are ones that are a little bit more nebulous from my standpoint, right? I try to keep, I understand, shades of gray and everything, but I like to keep things as black and white as much as I can. I realize that that's not the case, but the solicitations for me, where it's my job is easy, is when they tell me the level of effort, right? On those more complex bid where they say, hey, industry, come up with your staffing plan that you would need to do that. It's a lot more nebulous to me. So I had a client that was like, hey, sometimes we're way over the marks and sometimes we're way under the marks, on their basis of estimate. I've done those, but I'm not the technical expert that really knows how to execute these jobs. I rely on those people to give me good information, and I validate that and ask questions and things of that nature. But what I said to them is like, okay, there's no consistent theme, right? I'm not consistently over them or under them. It was all over the place. And I said, well, tell you what, why don't you go back at each one that you lost and reverse engineer into how you would have came up with the same price that was awarded. And they were like, oh, we never thought about that. And I was like, that's the first thing I always do. Right. If I don't win something, I want to, get my debrief, of course. I get them on wins too. But I look at those things a lot because, again, you never know what kind of nuggets are going to be in there that can help you on the next go around. And again, it's important to maintain those good relations with your contracting people. I mean, we all know that because they can help us win contracts. And that's what we want. We want our employers to win lots of contracts so we can stay employed and get promoted. Right. And that's what we all want.
John, one more thing. We will be sending something out in fairly soon, early December. December, typically the chapter has a social, or we have a Toys for Tots type event where we may get together and collect these goods and give them to an organization to pass along to needy families. But we haven't had our board meeting yet to see what that is. And sounds like we have some exciting things coming up in the spring.
Amen. Well, I'm happy to be a part of this chapter, and I'm looking forward to helping grow the membership and the numbers however I can. So, and also I found another guy that's he's in Smithfield. He's a BD guy that knows contracts pretty well, that has volunteered to speak if we are looking for something like that. So happy to help, Michael. Pleasure.
Great. Thank you. And Michael, thank you as well. And for all the attendees, we appreciate it. And it makes us all more aware and more intelligent.
Always be learning, right? If you don't know something, ask. Find the people who are, the quote unquote experts, and, pick their brain if they're willing. That's how I did this. I remember I've been following the right industry experts in DC, for at least 15 years now. And lo and behold, now I'm considered by some to be an expert, although I'm I just try my best here. I pick up a thing or two, learn some tricks along the way. But, just experiment, what makes sense here. Look at the details and then just try to figure out, again, how to help your company win, profitable contracts.
Yeah, it's all about sort of lessons learned, storing those in your mind so that you don't relearn something the hard way.
Yeah, learn from others' mistakes if they're willing to educate you on them. And I've made plenty of mistakes in my career. In fact, I just put on my LinkedIn profile today about this is the 10th year anniversary of the first time I was laid off, or you could say fired. I was a director of contracts for a small business. And it was my dream job at the time. I was a director of contracts. My job before that was a deputy director. So it was a logical progression. And I will admit that it sucked at the time. But good things happen to good people, and you just gotta kind of keep doing your thing, keep meeting the right people, and surround yourself with people who are trying to lift you up and help for the greater good. I guess I'm getting way off topic now, but anyway, so that's just a little bit about me. Again, pleasure meeting you all. If you have any questions, I'll let me put my contact information in the chat here, and I'll be on for another bit if anybody wants to chat a little more privately. Happy to entertain that.
And John, take a look, because I think a lot of folks have put their email addresses in.
Oh, they did. Okay.
Yeah.
I did record this, so yeah. Will I ever look at it again? That's another story.
We will force you to.
Well, I'm curious as to where it goes. If it goes to the yeah, I don't know. Again, this isn't my account, so that reminds me. I'm gonna switch back to Carrie now before I forget.
And John, it'll go to the metaverse. Okay.
What is that?
This recording will go to the metaverse.
Oh, yeah. Well, it probably already is there now. And I changed my name back. All right. Yeah. All right, everyone. Well, thanks for your time. You all have a wonderful evening. And thank you.
Thanks all.
Thanks, John.
Thank you again, John, very much.
Very welcome.
Thanks, guys.
Whew.